The wind howled across the flight deck of the aircraft carrier, a deep, menacing roar that threatened to carry everything away. Dark clouds swirled ominously above, darkening the sky to a dull steel gray. The heavy scent of salt water mixed with the unmistakable hum of jet engines as the storm's fury closed in. The crew moved quickly, the urgency of the storm mirrored by their swift, practiced steps. They were preparing for the worst, a flight operation that had to go off. Without a hitch, despite the encroaching chaos, every move had to be precise, every calculation flawless. Lives depended on it. Amidst the confusion, a solitary figure stood at the edge of the flight deck. Nicole, a crew member whose qualifications were as extensive as her years of experience, had been sidelined. She was tasked with holding position, waiting by the hangar doors, a place no one should have to stand. There was no obvious reason why she had been pushed aside. No one had questioned it. No one had asked her why. She watched the frenetic activity around her, her hands idle at her sides as the other crew members barked orders and scrambled to prepare for the incoming storm. Nicole could feel the tension in the air, a heavy weight pressing down on her chest. The storm was more than just weather. It was a signal, a warning. The aircraft on deck were preparing for an operation that demanded perfection. No room for mistakes. As the flight manifest was read aloud, Nicole stood there quietly, unnoticed, her role seemingly insignificant. It wasn't the first time her expertise had been ignored. She didn't ask why. She didn't protest. Instead, she absorbed the tension of the situation, feeling it settle deep into her bones. The crew moved in precise, coordinated patterns around her, but she was outside that choreography, silent, unseen. Her boots barely made a sound as they struck the steel deck, walking a careful path that avoided drawing attention. Her headset, unused and unneeded, hung loosely by her side. The cord, once taut with purpose, now lay slack. She knew the procedures, the systems, the equipment, everything that had been forgotten or disregarded by those in charge. Her binder, weathered with time and use, was tucked under her arm, the laminated pages marking her dedication. Inside there were systems, schematics, and manuals for equipment no longer officially in use, but which she knew had one last chance to save a life. She watched the weapons officer moving past, his focus completely on the task at hand. He didn't notice her. No one did. There was a sense of solitude in that moment, one that she had become used to. Even as the others rushed to complete their tasks, she stood apart, her presence barely acknowledged, but silently preparing for whatever might come. Even though her name wasn't called, even though her position wasn't clear in the flight ops logs, Nicole was ready. She wasn't being asked to act, but she knew something was coming. Something no one else was prepared for. The deck was filling with the sounds of urgency, the clamor of jet engines, the sharp orders shouted into radios. Yet, Nicole remained in the shadows, quietly watching the storm intensify. Every movement, every word spoken around her felt distant, like watching a scene unfold that she wasn't part of. Though she was physically in the middle of it, still, she waited, hands steady, eyes sharp. The storm was more than just the storm outside. It was about to break inside, the operation itself, and Nicole would be there when it did. The chaos was rising, but she had a role to play, even if no one had given her one. This was just the calm before the storm. Nicole stood at the edge of the bustling flight deck, the roar of engines and the sharp command of voices filling the air, but she remained unnoticed. Her task was simple: hold position, while the rest of the crew darted between jets and the maintenance crew rushed. To prep the planes for launch, Nicole stood on the sidelines, no one asking her to do anything more. She had been sidelined, as usual, not given a role in the immediate operation. Despite her experience, it wasn't new to her, this feeling of being relegated to the margins. Her qualifications were solid, her experience vast. Years of training had taught her the systems, the equipment, the nuances of keeping things running smoothly. Yet here she was, watching others do the work while she was left in the background, waiting for anything to happen. Nicole's eyes scanned the operations around her. Crew members hustled, working fast and with purpose. She wasn't a part of that choreography, though. They all moved as one, and she was left alone, waiting in the cold. Nicole didn't let it show. Her face remained impassive, but her mind was racing. She had been given a task hold position, and that's what she would do. But the frustration of not being trusted with more weighed heavily on her. The systems she had mastered were overlooked in favor of newer technology, and she knew it would only be a matter of time before those systems failed. The old systems, the ones she knew like the back of her hand, had been dismissed, but Nicole's knowledge of them remained sharp. The analog systems, the flare systems, the manual controls, they were her specialty. She could hear the faint hum of them in the background, waiting, even as the rest of the crew relied on the unreliable technology around them. She looked at the crew working furiously, their faces tense with concentration, their voices sharp and quick. No one spared her a glance. No one asked for her help. But Nicole wasn't bitter. Not really. She had learned long ago that her role was often behind the scenes. She accepted it. But inside, she knew that her experience could be the difference between success and failure in this operation. If things went wrong, the systems they relied on would crumble and she would be ready. As the storm approached, she checked her binder once more. The pages had seen better days, the edges worn from years of use, but the information it contained was as reliable as ever. She had memorized it all, and yet the crew continued to ignore it. Still, she pressed on, scanning the systems, checking the old analog components that no one else remembered. Every so often, she caught a glimpse of something out of place, something others overlooked. But she kept it to herself. There was no need to speak up. No one was listening. The ship around her was chaotic, the flight deck moving at a frantic pace. Yet Nicole moved through it all like a ghost. Her steps were deliberate, but quiet. She kept to the shadows, avoiding the bustle, but always watching. Her boots, scuffed from years of service, made barely a sound on the metal floor. She was like a part of the background, blending into the environment that had become both her home and her prison. She was calm in the chaos, not because she was unaffected, but because she had learned how to thrive in it. Her frustration remained, simmering beneath the surface, but her resolve was unwavering. Nicole stood there, knowing that her time would come. The storm, both outside and within the operation, was growing stronger. The crew continued to rush, unaware of the failure looming in the distance. She hoped it wouldn't come to that, but deep down, she knew it would. And when it did, she would be ready. She always was. The storm hit with a force that rattled the steel of the flight deck, the wind howling through the carrier's towers and sending waves of cold rain, sweeping across the open air. The first signs of trouble came swiftly, radios crackling and warbling with static, a signal that something was wrong. Crew members looked up, their movements faltering as the weather worsened. But they continued their work, pushing through the growing chaos. The deck, usually a precise dance of military operations, now felt unsteady, as if the storm was not just outside but inside too, shaking the core of the operation itself. Nicole stood still, her eyes fixed on the small screen near her, watching as the ICLS instrumented carrier landing system began to falter, flickering and stuttering. The system was a lifeline for the pilots, especially in these conditions where visibility was almost zero. But it was failing. The system was no longer giving accurate readings, and no one seemed to notice. Crew members rushed past, focused on the incoming jets, their eyes elsewhere. But the storm had already begun to take its toll. The deck was becoming more dangerous by the second as the guidance system, which was supposed to be their safety net, fell apart. Nicole's heart rate picked up, but her body remained calm, controlled. She was still sidelined, but that didn't matter now. She knew the systems they were relying on were already compromised, and soon. That failure would be catastrophic. The confusion on the flight deck was palpable, but Nicole's focus never wavered. She knew exactly what she needed to do. As the backup systems began to flicker and die, the urgency among the crew grew, but they were too absorbed in trying to fix the immediate problem to see the bigger picture. Everyone was scrambling to adjust, but no one seemed to realize the impending danger. They had no backup systems left. They were operating blind, relying on outdated technology that couldn't keep up with the storm's fury. Nicole, however, had seen this before. She had worked with the older, manual systems that the rest of the crew had written off. They were reliable. They worked. Nicole slipped past the bustling crew, unnoticed as usual, heading toward the back corner of the deck where the old systems were stored. She moved quickly but quietly, her every step measured and sure. Her hands, though cold from the rain, were steady as she retrieved the manual systems, the ones others had forgotten, the ones that had saved her in past operations. The analog systems were crude, outdated, but they were real. They were tangible. They didn't rely on the failing electronics that the rest of the crew was fighting to fix. They were simple. And in this moment, simplicity was all they had left. The wind screamed louder, and Nicole could feel the pressure building inside her chest. There was no time to lose. She connected the system to the power bus carefully, without rushing. As the crew scrambled around her, their voices rising in panic, they were looking for a solution. But Nicole already had one. The flare system, a relic of an earlier era, had the potential to guide the pilots in when nothing else could. She adjusted the system manually, flicking switches and rotating dials. all while the storm raged on. Outside, the sky had gone black, and the first jet was descending fast, its lights barely visible through the rain. Nicole could hear the jet's engines grow louder as it neared, but her hands didn't shake. She knew what had to be done. She knew how to adjust the flare to guide the plane safely onto the deck. Even in the chaos of the storm, the wind whipped around her, but she remained focused. The crew was still fighting with the failing systems, too busy to notice her quiet movements. They were too distracted to realize that someone had already stepped up, someone who had been sidelined but was now stepping into the gap. Without waiting for approval, the deck was a blur of motion, the sound of engines roaring, but Nicole's movements were deliberate, calm, and precise. She flicked the final switch, the old analog system coming to life in her hands. The flare beam, dim but steady, blinked into existence, casting a narrow path of light on the wet deck. It was all she needed. The pilot would follow her guidance, and he would land. Nicole's role was simple but vital: guide the jet in and get the pilot safely. On deck, the chaos continued around her, but Nicole's calmness cut through it all. She had done what no one else could. The deck crew was too busy managing the crisis to realize what was happening, but Nicole knew. She could already hear the first jet approaching. It was a race against time, a race against the storm, and Nicole was ready. The flare beam would hold, she would make sure of it. The crew around her still scrambled, their frantic calls growing louder. But Nicole's focus never wavered. As the plane neared, she adjusted the alignment slightly, compensating for the wind gusts. Her hands were steady, her mind clear, and for a moment, there was no one else on the deck except her and the incoming jet. The storm outside mirrored the growing urgency inside. The storm was no longer just weather. It was a sign of the failure of the systems they depended on. The jet, flying blind, was relying on Nicole now. She had no idea if it would be enough, but she didn't care. She would do what was necessary. Nicole's heart skipped a beat as the jet's engines roared through the storm, growing louder with each passing second. She didn't need to look up to know it was coming in fast. Desperate for guidance, flying blind in the torrential downpour. The system was down, the crew was frantic, and no one had thought to give her any orders. But the time for asking permission had passed. Nicole's eyes locked onto the old manual system she had quietly prepared. Moments earlier, still untouched by anyone else. With a steady hand, she moved towards them, confident and composed. Even as the wind howled around her and the storm battered the deck, her fingers barely hesitated as she flipped the switches and adjusted the analog dials. The flare system, a relic from a past era, was now her only hope. And in that moment, it was the only thing that would save the pilot. The other crew members were too busy trying to fix the digital systems that had already failed. They didn't even notice Nicole stepping into the void, taking control of what they had abandoned. She worked quickly, but with precision, adjusting the alignment and checking every detail. The storm raging around her. It was chaotic, but she was calm. In the midst of the turmoil, Nicole found clarity. The roar of the approaching jet was deafening, but Nicole didn't flinch. She had been in situations like this before, though not often. The flare system had been overlooked, but she knew it better than anyone else on the deck. She could almost hear the system hum in her hands, the very same system that had guided many pilots to safety long before it was deemed obsolete. As the aircraft drew nearer, she adjusted the flare's beam with a steady hand, carefully compensating for the wind's increasing strength. There was no time to second guess, no time for doubt. Every movement felt instinctive, as if she had done this 100 times before. With the flare system finally aligned, Nicole's attention shifted to the communication channel. Her headset wasn't connected to the main comms. It was an old piece of equipment, disconnected from the digital chaos. She reached for it anyway, her fingers swift as she pressed the mic to her lips. This was the moment. There was no backup, no support. The pilot would have to trust her, just as she was trusting the old system that no one else had believed in. She spoke softly, her voice unwavering despite the storm's fury, giving the pilot clear, concise instructions. The wind screamed in her ears, and the deck trembled beneath her feet. But Nicole remained unmoved. She guided the jet with calm precision, her words quiet yet firm, breaking through the storm's roar like a beacon of certainty. Stay with the flare line, ease the throttle, and keep your pitch steady. Her mind raced, calculating adjustments, compensating for the shifting winds, but there was no panic. There was only clarity. The storm outside and the chaos on the deck faded away as Nicole's focus zeroed in on the pilot's approach. She could hear the jet getting closer, its engines roaring like thunder, but she wasn't afraid. She knew this system. She knew it would work. In that moment, Nicole wasn't waiting for someone else to take charge. She wasn't asking for permission. She had already made the decision. Her calm, measured actions cut through the storm, and she held steady as the aircraft descended, its wheels inches from the deck. The old analog system flickered, but it held, guiding the plane with precision. Sparks flew as the tailhook scraped the wire, the jet landing safely despite the storm's best efforts to tear everything apart. Nicole's fingers were still on the controls as the jet came in, but she never moved from her spot. The crew around her, still struggling with the broken systems, didn't see her or hear her voice. They didn't know that the plane had just been saved by someone who wasn't even supposed to be there. Nicole stood still, her job done, but there was no fanfare, no cheers. She didn't need them. The quiet heroism of her actions was enough. Her hands were steady, even as the rain lashed against her face. The storm had intensified, but she had already decided she would guide the jet in no matter what. And she had done it, silently, without anyone asking her to. She stepped away from the system, her eyes still on the landing zone as the aircraft rolled to a stop. No one was looking at her, but she didn't care. It had always been this way. But now, as the jet was safely on the deck, Nicole knew that she had done what needed to be done. Without a single word of approval, the jet's engines screamed through the storm, the roar deafening even from the deck. Nicole felt the ground tremble under her feet as the plane approached rapidly, its descent steep and uncontrolled. The storm whipped the deck into chaos, and yet, amidst the noise and confusion, Nicole remained unfazed. She focused on the flare system she had set up earlier, the small, flickering light that would guide the pilot in when nothing else could. Her hands, though cold and slick with rain, were steady as she adjusted the beam slightly, compensating for the increasing crosswind. The jet's tailhook would need to be right on target, and she could only hope that the pilot trusted her as much as she trusted her. System. Nicole's voice cut through the static, calm and precise. She didn't shout or force her words over the roar of the storm. Her instructions were simple, clear, almost reassuring, as though there was no danger at all. Follow the flare line. Keep your pitch steady and your throttle in check. You're coming in too hot. Ease it just a little more. She could feel the urgency mounting in her chest, but she didn't let it show. The pilot, out of sight, could only hear her voice now. It was all he had. He had to trust her. The seconds felt like hours as the jet continued its descent, the space between them closing fast. Nicole's eyes never left the flare beam, her fingers gently adjusting the angle. The pilot's voice crackled over the radio, his words a desperate mix of relief and disbelief. "I see the beam," he said, his tone strained. "I'm coming in." The storm roared louder, but Nicole's steady hand remained firm on the controls. She could hear the jet now, a powerful, terrifying sound that seemed to get closer with every heartbeat. The aircraft was flying blind, guided solely by her voice and the dim light of the old system. Nicole's confidence didn't waver. She knew this system. She knew how to make it work. The seconds stretched, and the tension was unbearable. But still, her voice remained calm. "Ease off the throttle. You're lined up, but you have to stay on it for just one more second. Hold steady." The jet's wheels were close now, too close, the sound of the approach deafening. But Nicole knew it wasn't too late. As it came closer, she adjusted the flare just slightly, making sure the angle was perfect for the landing. Every motion felt like an eternity, but to her, it was all instinct. There was no room for doubt. The jet was almost on the deck now, and Nicole could feel the electric anticipation in the air. The tailhook scraped the metal of the deck with a sharp, sudden sound. Sparks flew as the wire caught, the landing successful, but not without a violent jolt. Nicole's heart pounded as the plane touched down, the deck vibrating under the weight of the jet's landing. She could hear the crew in the distance, their voices rising in relief, but Nicole remained in the shadows. She didn't need anyone to notice her, didn't need the cheers. She had done her job. The jet was safe. Her fingers were still gripping the flare system, but she felt the tension begin to ebb as the plane came to a complete stop. The crew around her was still scrambling to handle the aftermath, their heads down, unaware of the role she had played in the success of the landing. Nicole wiped the rain from her face, her expression calm and composed as she slowly stepped back from the system. Her work was done, but the storm raged on, still threatening to pull them under. The pilot had landed. That was all that mattered. As the crew began resetting the wires and the recovery process continued, Nicole didn't linger to watch the success unfold. She stepped quietly into the shadows, her presence unnoticed. She knew this was just another day in a career full of quiet, unsung moments. She had guided the jet in, saved a life, and no one even knew. There was no need for thanks. Her role had been fulfilled, and she had done it with a calm that had carried her through the storm. The moment the jet touched down, the tension in the air seemed to snap. The deck crew cheered, but their voices were drowned out by the roar of the storm and the hum of the recovery operation. In the control tower, confusion took hold. Senior officers leaned over their screens, scanning for answers. There was no record of who had guided the plane in, no sign of an authorized voice on the channel. The logs didn't match the landing, and no one could explain what had just happened. The crew scrambled to find the source of the communication, but the answer remained elusive. They searched through the radio transmissions, flipping through the logs, trying to piece together what had gone wrong. But Nicole knew that no one would find what they were looking for. She had stayed quiet, as always, and the system had done what it needed to do. The confusion in the tower deepened, but Nicole wasn't there to clarify it. She had already slipped away, quietly disappearing into the shadows of the flight deck. As the officers continued their search, Nicole walked off the deck, the rain still falling heavily around her. No one acknowledged her. No one asked how the plane had landed safely. No one seemed to know that she had been the one to guide it in. She didn't mind. She wasn't there for recognition. She had done her job, and that was enough. The crew inside the tower was still caught up in the mystery of the unsanctioned landing, their voices rising in frustration and confusion. But Nicole didn't need to be there. She didn't need to explain herself. She had seen their struggle, felt their desperation, and stepped in without hesitation. Now, she was leaving the deck as quietly as she had arrived, her work done and unnoticed by those who had been too distracted by the storm's fury to see her. Nicole's boots clicked softly against the wet steel as she made her way back, toward the entrance. The wind tugged at her jacket, but she didn't bother adjusting it. Her thoughts were steady, but there was a hint of melancholy in the air. She wasn't angry that no one had recognized her. She wasn't bitter about the lack of acknowledgement. But there was a certain solitude in the silence she walked through, a quiet reminder that her actions, no matter how crucial, would go unspoken. No one would ever know that it was Nicole who had guided the jet in, saving the pilot's life when the systems had failed. There were no cheers, no applause, just the soft sound of her boots on the deck, the rhythm of someone who had done what was needed without expectation. She passed the busy crew without a glance, their focus already shifting to the next task. The storm continued to lash against the carrier, but for Nicole, the noise of it was far away. Her work had been done, and there was no need for anything more. The quiet satisfaction of a job well done settled in her chest as she made her way to the ladder that led below deck. No one had stopped to thank her, but she hadn't needed that. She wasn't seeking anything more than the simple knowledge that she had helped. When it counted, the deck lights flickered as Nicole walked away, her binder tucked securely under her arm. The storm outside had not passed, but the immediate danger had. She had done her part. As she descended into the ship, she couldn't help but feel a small, quiet pride. No one knew, but she didn't need anyone to. Her efforts had made a difference, and that was enough. The crew continued to move in a frenzy, securing the aircraft and processing the successful landing. The noise in the tower had not yet died down, the tension still hanging thick in the air. Amidst the flurry of activity, one of the younger officers, a technician who had been monitoring the comms, stopped. His eyes shifted from the screens to the empty channel, the one that had guided the jet in. For a moment, he stood there, staring. Then, almost to himself, he muttered, "Whoever guided that plane in, it wasn't anyone on the manifest." His words barely cut through the clamor, but the shift was immediate. The senior officers, caught up in their own confusion, looked toward him, as if the realization hadn't fully dawned. The tech leaned over to the control board, pointing to the open channel that had been active for the past few minutes. "That's not in the system," he said, his voice a quiet admission of the unknown. The other officers exchanged glances, their earlier urgency now tempered with confusion, as if something unsaid had just started to make sense. They continued to search the logs, trying to piece together what had happened. But there was no immediate answer. The channel that had saved the landing was untraceable, its source still a mystery. Nicole, meanwhile, was already moving away, her steps deliberate and slow as she made her way off the deck. She was invisible again, lost in the sea of busy crew members who were too caught up in the aftermath to notice her absence. Her presence had been as unnoticed as it had always been, even though her actions had made all the difference. The crew was beginning to realize, bit by bit, what had truly happened. They started to piece together the events, but by then, Nicole was already gone. No one knew for sure who had guided the jet in, but in that quiet realization, there was a subtle shift in their perception. They began to understand that someone had stepped in when no one else could. Her name might not be recorded in the logs, and her face wasn't on the monitors, but in that moment, they all knew the truth. Back on the deck, Nicole walked toward the ladder leading below, her boots clicking softly against the steel. She didn't need anyone to acknowledge her. She didn't need anyone to tell her that her actions had saved the pilot's life. There was no fanfare, no applause, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had done what needed to be done. She had led when no one else could. The noise from the control tower faded as Nicole descended, but a subtle shift had taken place. As the crew continued their work, they had begun to see her differently. Nicole's heroism had been quiet, uncelebrated, but it had carried its weight in ways words couldn't express. She had never sought the spotlight, and she certainly wasn't seeking recognition now. The crew, in their own unspoken way, started to realize the value she had brought, even if no one had directly thanked her. The silence around her was profound, the calm after the storm of activity. As she made her way to the stairwell, Nicole felt the shift, though no one said a word. The appreciation wasn't loud, but it was there, in the way the crew moved now a little slower, a little more deliberate. They had seen what she could do, even if they hadn't fully realized it before. In the end, there was no need for acknowledgement. She had done her job, and in the quiet of that recognition, she felt a rare peace. Nicole didn't look back as she made her way below deck. The storm still raged outside, but for her, it was over. She had stepped in when it mattered most, and though the crew didn't cheer or celebrate, there was an unspoken respect now. She had earned that, without a single word spoken in her direction. In the end, the story of Nicole isn't one of loud applause or overt recognition. It's about the quiet heroism that often goes unnoticed, the kind of bravery that doesn't seek the spotlight, but rises when needed most. Nicole acted without expectation, stepping in when everything else failed, and yet she didn't need anyone's acknowledgement to know she had done the right thing. This is the power of small actions in critical moments. It's the idea that sometimes the most significant difference we can make in the world comes from doing what needs to be done, even when no one is watching. The story of Nicole invites us to reflect on our own potential to make an impact. We may not always find ourselves in a life or death situation, but we are presented with opportunities every day to act with quiet strength, to do what's right without waiting for someone to tell us to do so. It's a reminder that heroism doesn't always come in grand gestures, but in the small, steady decisions we make to stand up when others might look the other way. Nicole's story speaks to those who quietly take action, trusting their instincts and doing their part without ever needing to prove themselves to anyone. As you reflect on this story, think about how you too can make a difference in your own life. Every action you take, no matter how small, can have a lasting impact. Sometimes, the quietest acts of bravery are the most powerful, shaping the world in ways that words can't describe. We all have the ability to step up, to be that person who helps, who acts when needed, without waiting for recognition or reward. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear how you've experienced or witnessed quiet heroism in your own life. If you want to hear more inspiring stories of strength and service, don't forget to subscribe. Remember, it's the uncelebrated moments that often hold the most profound impact. Let's continue to share these stories and remind each other of the power of acting with purpose, no matter who is watching.